Uh, Jerry Fisher, like the rest of us, realized that perhaps the most innocent people with whom you can deal are medical doctors. And here are these two dials that have various frequency settings, and the doctors very seldom read instructions. So Jerry came up with a marvelous idea. If I got some different colored Scotch stick-on masking tape and cut little dots that are red and orange and green and yellow and paste these dots on the dial, we can tell the doctor, match up the yellow dot with the yellow dot. And this made it almost idiot-proof. And so instead of talking specific frequencies, which is ridiculous when you're dealing with anything other than sine waves, you match the dots. And he would come back months later and find that the device was still set on the same dots as when he walked out of the office, and it was working fine, so everybody was happy. All of this apocrypha is now being replaced by hard science in these conferences. I've attended a number of them. It says electricity is the thing which makes you better, etc., etc. Well, at any rate, this was the political state of affairs in 1983 when a lot of people who did not know the difference between frequency and pulse repetition rate and had never heard of heterodynes and harmonics were looking for the Holy Grail. The way they normally did this, they would put the box on the dope addict, and they would just juggle a dial and say, how does this feel, how does this feel, how does this feel? It was a fairly empirical process. How many of you read the Omni article in January 73? Okay. 83, I'm sorry. You notice there that the main secret of making the person better was to twiddle the knob, because at that time they did not know what the frequencies were. It has been fairly well established that the beta endorphins are stimulated with a pulse repetition rate of between 90 and 111 hertz. The catecholamine at around 4 hertz, the enkephalin at another number, etc., etc. This work has been very well documented and very well replicated by a number of scientific laboratories. So what we decided to do in our box was to put all of these frequencies simultaneously. Now, some people said, well, shouldn't you do one and then another and then another? And it's turned out not to be this way at all. If you have a high Q circuit, you can put white noise into it and ring the filters, right? And the brain is an exceedingly high Q circuit. It appears to have a Q in certain of the neuronal constructs of around 3,000, which is amazingly high. Pardon me?
Q is again what?
The figure of merit. Q means the band pass versus the energy required. A crystal set will get all the radio stations in the area at once. A super heterodyne or TRF will get narrower and narrower bandwidth. If you have a triple or double conversion super heterodyne, you can separate two stations that are within a kilohertz of each other. The difference between those is the Q of the circuit, which is tuning to the signal. The higher the Q, the lower the band pass, the less the interference. So we developed a system. We broke the price barrier. Most of these things sold from $5,000 up, that had everything in it that was necessary for the brain to rehabilitate its own production of neurotransmitters. In the meantime, we had found about 200 pounds of literature, at least I have that many boxes full of Xerox material, that friends had sent me, literally cardboard cartons. My filing system is abysmal. I'm very creative. I just pile it in boxes and hope I can find it later. Of the work that had been done, absolutely establishing that any stress-related syndrome, and this is why the psychologists hate this device, the stress-related symptoms that are recognized are insomnia, addiction, anxiety, and depression. That about 95% of the people who use these devices for a period of less than a month find complete reversal of these, and here the psychologists had been talking to them for years at $50 to $75 an hour. The pharmacologists had been giving them mood-elevating, depressing, and altering drugs since the good old days of Milltown and into the more elaborate pharmacology. And here was a little box that, with a 98-cent transistor radio battery would fix maybe 50 different people before the battery ran down and you had to replace it. That's about a half a cent a person. And so naturally, there was a great deal of resistance to this type of technology. So right now, there's this political hassle happening over the fact that even the Carnegie report, as you were the study back at the turn of the century, tried to damn all of the electronic medicine that had been proven back in the 1890s to be highly effective. And you know who funded those studies. It's very much like the American tobacco industry saying that the link between lung cancer and smoking, there isn't any. It's just... So we could go on and on about this. Basically, that's what the device is. That's how I started to do it. I hated to see people being charged $1,000 a day, and the thing just grew and grew and grew and grew and grew. I'm sure there are a lot of specific questions here, and maybe a lot of other topics that we can discuss tonight. So what? Sure.
I need to turn that a little bit more. I just wasn't concerned about the absence of data regarding the device. I was also concerned about the absence of data, supposedly, about the actual results of using this on drug addicts.
Okay, the results of this in drug addicts were generated in the United States several years before Meg learned about the device in Hong Kong. And the vast literature on this was funded by the Neurosystems Incorporated group in Garland, Texas. The studies were done with, how many of you have heard of the executive monkey study? Okay. This work was funded by the people who had brought this box out originally in 1970. This is before Dr. Wen had had his serendipity, his accidental discovery with the heroin addicts in Hong Kong. I didn't realize that you could give monkeys ulcers. But what they had done is to aggravate them enough to where they had ulcers, put the device on their acupuncture points, they found that within about 3 days they had reversed the pH of the acidity, and the monkeys got better, the control group. All of this work had been thoroughly done long before this current era of re-stimulation of interest. The rat studies had been done both in San Francisco and in Hong Kong. The chromatography had been done here in the United States, so it was well controlled. There is a wealth of information on this, and I'd be delighted to share the bibliography with you. Like electronic medicine, when we were looking at patents, we found a patent in 1893 showing a fellow with electrodes behind his ears. Did I show you that, Paul? Okay. 1893, before the Harrison Act, some 20-some years before the Harrison Act, you could go into any drugstore and buy morphine sulfate. Mothers whose babies cried could buy simple soothing syrup, which was sugar and morphine. She'd give a teaspoon to the baby, and the baby wouldn't cry anymore. There were quite a few addicts. The stuff was legal. There was no control. I mean, marijuana was legal. All the good stuff was legal. And after the act, a number of people who were trying to get off this had forgotten that around 1890 we had a hell of a lot more addicts in this country. The women who were religious were sipping tonic, which was about 200 proof alcohol for their health, taking bitters and what have you. In other words, we had about the same addiction level, and this work had been explored about 84, 85 years ago, and then again suppressed by what we feel is the ruling class of the doctors, the pharmacies, and the people who want to take your money for making you better. So if you're interested, we have this vast literature. We have a bibliography. We have a patent list. Fisher, no relation to Jerry, had done this work in 1932 and 35 and had a number of patents. Remember the Fisher Instrument Company that was making electrical stimulating devices back there 40 years ago or so? Okay, this has been in the literature. They had explored in great depth the waveforms, the frequencies, the application modes, and what have you.
At this point, you may want to fast forward your tape to the end and get ready for part 2 of Dr. Robert C. Beck on the Brain Tuner.